Anyway, my name is John. I'm part of the financial markets team at Standard Chartered Bank. I look after the commodity business, right? And thank you for inviting me back. I got to speak about carbon last year as well. A lot of people ask me, in fact, my boss included, John, why do you spend so much of your time on carbon when only 5% of the revenue we make is from carbon? And the answer is simple, right? It's 5% today, but I genuinely believe it could actually be closer to 30% tomorrow, or maybe even more, right? But there's also another reason. So just between you and I, the other reason why I'm so passionate about carbon and sustainability is that I have two daughters, aged 4 and 7, and I want them to grow up in a world that's unaffected by climate change, right? I read a very worrying statistic, and I think it affects all of us here. For those of us who have children below 12 years old, they are 4 times more likely to experience a catastrophic climate event. So you may have heard in the news, a Cat 4 hurricane is approaching Florida. 2.5 million people are being evacuated. If you're old enough like me, you remember the effects and the lingering effects of Katrina. So do we want our children to actually endure something like that in the future? Certainly not, right? I know in Singapore it's very easy to be very complacent. We'll be fine here in Singapore, nothing to worry about. But for those of us who grew up in Singapore, I'm sure you remember that temperatures are actually significantly higher today. The monsoon season, not yet, the monsoon season seems to come earlier and it lasts longer. So quite clearly, there is a change in the climate in our world. So don't worry, I'm not here to sell you carbon credits, okay? I'm not here to tell you the wonders and benefits of it all, but what I wanted to do instead was basically to talk about an alternative approach to carbon offsets, and that's by investing in nature-based solutions. So I think we all agree that climate change is real, right? And the science is that for us to avoid catastrophic climate change, we need to stay within the 1.5 degree pathway. And to do so, we need to keep our total carbon emissions forever to 570 gigatons of CO2. That is known as our carbon budget. Okay? And to do that, we need to get to net zero by 2050. But that's not the challenging part, right? To keep us on this pathway, the most difficult part is that we need to reduce our carbon emissions by 50% in 2030. So ask yourself, are we doing enough? Are we doing enough for our children? The good news is that many governments, corporates, even individuals have rallied towards the cause. 1,800 companies or more have made public commitments towards sustainability. So you ask yourself, why do these companies do it, right? Is it for marketing and PR? Perhaps. Is it because of shareholder pressure? Possibly. Is it because they have daughters or sons that are under 12? Likely so, right? But I believe that everyone has good intentions and that we are all here to invest in a sustainable future. So we all know that the transition away from fossil fuels is not easy. There are some industries like manufacturing, transport. You know better than I, there is no commercially viable alternative to bunker. We can't just move away from fossil fuels today. But at the same time, does it make sense for you to just buy carbon credits to offset your Scope 1 emissions? Probably not, right? You're not in the compliance markets. If you were to spend that kind of money, it would put you at a disadvantage to your competitors. How about a carbon tax then? I'm sure that was discussed yesterday. But then again, taxes are usually state implemented. How do we do that universally and make it a level playing field for everybody? That's not so simple. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer for you today. But what I can do is perhaps share with you what I've actually learned from having discussions with some clients. So let's take a different industry altogether, the coal industry, okay? For them, they're one of the biggest emitters. But guess what? Because of market dislocation, coal prices are astronomical and they are literally printing money today. Should they take that money and buy carbon offsets? That doesn't make any sense, right? It doesn't make sense to offset their Scope 1 emissions. So what they're doing instead, I realize, is that they're setting up transition teams. And what they're doing with their money is they're actually investing in nature-based solutions, which will then give them a supply of carbon credits 5 or 7 years from now. So what happens then is that you're not actually buying credits now, but you're investing in a project that may give you credits in the future. So when you do get those credits 5 or 7 years later, you may choose to use those credits to offset your own emissions. But if not, you have the opportunity then to monetize it, to sell it into the market, right? You ask me, John, who's going to buy my credits? I can tell you today that assuming we are comfortable with the location and we are comfortable with the project developer, I will sign an offtake contract with you right now to buy all your credits because I know they will be in demand in the future. The next question people ask me, oh, but how about price risk? I'm going to invest $50 million in this today. How do I know what's the price I can achieve for these credits 5, 7 years later? Unfortunately, there is no futures market to hedge that far out. But let me just give you some anecdotal evidence, right? There's going to be a scarcity of carbon projects in the future. And as more companies and individuals make sustainability commitments, the demand for these credits will only go up. So I don't really remember my economics from school, but if I recall correctly, if demand goes up and supply comes down, what happens to price? It goes up, right? I think that's a fairly safe assumption. Okay, I'm going to skip through this slide. All right, so if it's okay with you guys, I'm going to spend the rest of today's session basically talking about how we can invest in nature-based solutions, right? And to understand nature-based solutions and the carbon projects, we need to understand voluntary carbon credits itself, right? So there are 4 registries, 4 recognized standards for which carbon credits are actually registered on. The largest is VERA, which covers about 70% of the market and usually lists the projects that are based here in the emerging markets. The second largest is Gold Standard. They have about 20% of the market, but that really caters more to European buyers. The other two, CAR and ACR, have about 5% of the market each, and they usually account more towards the American buyers. So for all intensive purposes, if we were to invest in a nature-based solution here in this region, it would be most likely listed on VERA. Okay, so looking at this slide, you probably can't read the text, but what it basically is showing is the scaling of carbon credits in the last 15 years or so. We can see that the growth of nature-based solutions is the largest number, followed by tech. But even though there's a surplus of carbon credits today, market analysis shows that there will be a deficit by 2030. McKinsey analysis says that the demand for voluntary carbon credits will increase by 15 times by 2030 and 40 times by 2050. So again, back to supply and demand economics, as demand goes up and supply comes down, price naturally will go up, right? But let me give you another point of reference as well. The compliance markets in Europe. One EUA, one EU allowance over there, is currently trading about 65 euros. At its peak, it went to 90 euros. This compares to a high-quality carbon credit in Asia priced at $15. At some point, these two markets have to converge, right? Will they be the same? Probably not, but they will certainly become closer. All signs point that carbon credit prices should increase in the future. All right, and if you look at this map over here, it shows that Asia is the main source of low-cost nature-based solutions or carbon credit or voluntary carbon credits. Indonesia alone accounts for 15% of global supply. In monetary terms, the value of their carbon today, if they had done all the projects, is $25 billion. 25. There's massive potential to monetize these nature-based solutions. Projects in Indonesia could generate revenues of between $4 to $8 billion in the next 10 years. And this is based on an estimate of 40 metric tons per year at a conservative price of between $10 and $20 per metric ton. So let me give you a bit of background on the cost of investing in a project in Indonesia. In per metric tons terms, 1 metric ton of carbon, it costs between $3 and $4 to do the whole verification process, setting it up, getting the auditors, and getting a carbon credit issued to you. Like any project in Indonesia, whether it's mining, palm oil, you'll need to build communities, build infrastructure, schools, and these people will take care of the forest for you, right? That costs another $2, as an example. So all in, the cost of getting one nature-based solution of a high-quality credit is between $5 and $6 per metric ton in Indonesia. If you export this, and you can monetize it in the international market for $15 to $18, hey, happy days, right? That's a decent amount of money in your pocket. Unfortunately today, as of April, there's a moratorium on the export of carbon credits. The Standard Chartered was invited to speak to the ministries on this point and to show them that the opportunity is too large to ignore. I'm under good advice that this moratorium will be lifted after COP27, and they will continue to allow the export of these credits so that these projects can continue. All right, so what are the project characteristics of a nature-based project, right? The first thing is additionality. You probably heard this term used all the time and you're wondering, John, what is additionality? It's basically saying that would these removal of carbon dioxide have happened if the project didn't exist? For example, if you replant a forest and you remove carbon dioxide, obviously that's additional. But if you want to claim carbon credits for not cutting down a forest where there were no plans to cut them down in the first place, that is not additional. But however, if let's say you had the rights to cut down this forest and plant a palm oil plant station, you change that. You change the use rights and keep that instead, that's additional. You can then claim carbon credits for that. And that's key, right? So obviously there needs to be a methodology and proper accounting for this as well. Monitoring is very important to ensure that project developers are doing exactly what they say. And nowadays we can use satellite technology to make sure that the forests are not being cut down, right? At the same time, that allows permanence so that when a project takes place, it is not reversed in the future. Co-benefits, another term that is commonly used, right? And I think that's very critical in voluntary carbon markets as well. Because not only, people are not obliged to buy these credits, right? So when you buy a credit, you want to know what the co-benefits are. Does it contribute to biodiversity? Are there social benefits? Does it create employment? Those kind of things. And finally, the project participants are important, the developers of these projects. Where does the money go? Is it being used to line somebody's pocket? Or is it used to basically do research and plant more forests, or to basically help us move towards a net zero future? That's very critical as well. So here's the life cycle of a project, okay? It all starts with a project developer, okay? It could be any one of us here, if we had the money. We would then basically register this project with a registry like Vera, for example, right? We will lay down our plans, say what we'll do a proper accounting for it, and all this has to be as per the methodology of the registry. Once that's done, we'll get a third-party auditor to review our plans, to make sure that it's kosher. After that, the project gets approved by, say, Vera, and then we go on to the second phase, which is the verification stage. In that verification, we actually need to track how much carbon dioxide is actually removed from the atmosphere. That is obviously going to be tracked by a third-party auditor as well. And then finally, again, approved by the registry. Then and only then will the registry award you these carbon credits, which can then be monetized in the market. Just so that we are clear, these credits can only be awarded on a retrospective basis, which means that you can only claim a carbon credit once the carbon dioxide has been removed from the atmosphere. You can't say, oh, give me the carbon credit now for a future removal. Doesn't work that way. So that's why carbon credits are issued on an annualized basis. And step 2 and 3, which is the verification and the issuance, needs to be done every single year. But technically, it can happen in perpetuity as well, as long as the forests remain there, right? So all in, this process will take at minimum 24 months, assuming that the forests are already there. What that means is that if you were to invest in an afforestation project today, the money, you would only see any money 24 months later. It's going to take some time, right? All right, so let's look at one of the most popular projects in Indonesia called the Katingan project. This project was actually developed by a company called PT Rimba Utama. They are also supported by Permian Global and Wetlands International. And this is primarily a peat soil restoration project. So this project covers 150,000 hectares of land and removes 7.5 million metric tons of carbon dioxide per annum. That's a lot. That's more than the entire California state. Just to give you some perspective, right? But the co-benefits of this project are fantastic as well, and that's why it's so valuable in the international market. It helps stabilize water flows, it prevents peat fires, it enriches soil nutrients, and gives a supply of clean water to the community as well. Also, very importantly, it contributes to biodiversity. This area is the home for the endangered species of the orangutan, as well as the proboscis monkey. So not exactly something towards sustainability, but it is clearly has co-benefits, and hence why this project trades at a premium to most other projects in the market. So I'm going to take some time to talk about the core carbon principles. I keep saying high quality credit, right? And you're probably saying, John, that is very vague. Can you define what a high quality carbon credit is? That's not easy because there's so many definitions to this, right? And very often it's subject to debate. But whenever there is uncertainty, that opens the window for potential greenwashing. That's not what we want. So hence, I think that's why the core carbon principles are so important. So this is started by the Integrity Council. You may have remembered that this is one of the recommendations of the Task Force of Scaling Voluntary Carbon Credits, is to actually set up this Integrity Council. And the purpose of this Integrity Council is to basically, accelerate towards net zero and keep us on the 1.5 degree pathway. It is actually an independent governance body. Okay, it is not a company, it is not a government, it is basically a bunch of individuals who come together to work towards this purpose of using the best science and expertise available to define what is the minimum threshold for what a high quality carbon credit should be. So there are three things that the Integrity Council is trying to do, right? We're going to set forth what the core carbon principles are, which sets the standard of a high-quality carbon credit. The second part is the assessment framework, which is the criteria to evaluate carbon projects. And third, we're going to have the assessment procedure, which is the tagging of these carbon credits. Okay? So, there are 10 things, 10 fundamental principles which define what a high-quality carbon credit should be. I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but maybe I should just highlight a few. We talked about additionality just now. You remember what that is, right? There should be no double counting, and that's very critical, right? So, for example, a carbon credit that is issued in Indonesia, if it's used overseas to offset somebody else's carbon emissions, it cannot be used for Indonesia's NCEs as well. There should be no double counting, and that's critical, right? Another part is that it has to be permanent. These projects cannot be reversed in the future, otherwise it is pointless. A lot of these points here that surround these points is about on accountability, and that's why we use third-party validation and verification to ensure there is no monkey business that goes on. And I think finally, with all the efforts that happen here, the main purpose is to transition to a net zero future. Okay? So again, this is not a dictatorship. We're not telling the market what a high quality carbon credit should be. This needs to be a collective process. And that's why the Integrity Council had put together a discussion paper, which has been circulated. If you go to the Integrity Council website, you can download this discussion paper. And at the moment, we are taking feedback from the community on what this is. This feedback will be consolidated and will be published by the end of 2022. And hopefully by Q1 23, we will then start the assessment process for all the projects available. So I do recognize that I have a few more minutes. I'm happy to take any questions from the floor.
Is there a secondary market in carbon credits?
Absolutely. Stand chart. Basically, there's the primary markets are the futures exchange, right? For example, the CME. You may have heard of Climate Impact X, which is an exchange that Standard Chartered is co-founding with DBS, Temasek, and SGX. But clearly there is a secondary market as well. Traders like Trafigura, Vitor, Glencore are setting up trading desks to trade on the secondary market. We've hired 3 traders in the last 6 months to trade this market as well. Like I mentioned, if you have a supply of credits, I'm quite happy to buy them from you because I'm fairly certain that there will be a buyer for this in the future as well.
Okay. Question? Yes, sir.
Thank you. What's the minimum, typically the minimum viable investment amount to start a project?
So in general, for a project of a decent size, which may generate about 1 million metric tons of carbon 5 years from now, right, range between $15 to $20 million. It's not a small amount, but it is quite a decent bite size, I would say. So usually what happens is that there isn't going to be one sponsor. Usually people come together and do it. For example, in PT Rimbaraya's case, they actually had Wetlands International and Permian Global join them as well. So usually we are looking for co-investment in these projects. So you wouldn't invest in just one project itself. There's too much concentration risk, right? You will look to invest in multiple, and the bank, through our sustainable finance team, can look to help finance these projects, and perhaps even look to risk participate, assuming that we are comfortable with the developers.
A final question? No? Then John, thank you very much.
So maybe if I can leave you with a quote from Robert Swan: the greatest risk to the world environment is thinking that somebody else would save it. I have a quote as well, and I say that we can all do our part to contribute to climate change, but we can do so in an economically viable way and potentially make some money along the way. Thank you.